There was blood trickling from her nose, but her eyes, they were still open, wide, glassy, dazed, and frozen in a stare that looked more like a memory than life. She lay there, lifeless yet breathing, on the gravel shoulder of a winding forest road just outside Ashland, Oregon, a forgotten stretch of earth where the trees leaned in too close and silence could hide 1,000 tragedies. Dust and pine needles clung stubbornly to her matted fur like remnants of a lost struggle. Her tiny face raw with abrasions, and one ear twisted into an angle that made onlookers wince. To the average driver speeding past, she was just another piece of roadkill, a smear of fur, a mistake no one would stop for. But then, something shifted. A car slowed, brake lights flared red in the dusk, and a figure stepped out, boots crunching over gravel. They approached cautiously, not expecting much. Maybe a raccoon, maybe nothing. But as they knelt closer, what lay before them wasn't nothing. It was something sacred and broken, a kitten. Wild, spotted, bleeding, a soul on the edge. He heals the broken-hearted and binds up their wounds. The person's breath caught as they dialed the number for local wildlife rescue, words shaky. I think it's a bobcat. It's not moving. I don't know if it's still alive. On the other end, volunteers were dispatched immediately. Their van raced through the Oregon dusk, hearts braced for the worst, for recovery, not rescue. But as one of them crouched beside her and gently reached out, the smallest miracle happened. A flicker, just one eye twitched, a whisper of consciousness. No sound, no growl, no struggle, just a faint defiance of death itself. She was maybe 7 weeks old, maybe younger, alone for hours, hit by a car. Her back leg spasmed with each fading heartbeat. There was no mother nearby. No signs of siblings. Just a baby cat whose story wasn't supposed to start like this. They wrapped her in a thermal rescue blanket, supporting her neck and lifting her broken body onto a stretcher with hands that trembled with both urgency and hope. The blood from her nose had reached her lips now. Her jaw sagged slightly. Her paws were curled like question marks. The van turned around toward the rescue center, and time stretched thin with each passing second. A volunteer kept count of her breaths. Another watched her pulse. She didn't hiss, didn't cry. She only stared, not at them, but beyond them, into something none of them could see. The soul of every living thing is in the hand of God. When they reached the center, they placed her under soft amber lights like a newborn in an intensive care cradle. IVs slipped into her tiny veins, fluids began to flow. A specialist was called in immediately. The early report was brutal, possible. Brain trauma, internal bleeding, nerve damage. They weren't even sure if she could see. They didn't know if she'd ever walk. There were no broken bones, no wounds that could be stitched or bandaged, only the invisible injuries, the quiet devastations that steal futures without a sound. They named her Rumi because she would have to share this space between life and death with fate itself. She remained motionless for hours, not asleep, not fully conscious, just trapped in the stillness of pain. Her muscles were clenched, her eyes open but vacant. Volunteers cleaned the blood from her face, whispered her name like a prayer, and waited. Waited as the machines beeped and time moved slow. Outside the kennel, no one said it aloud, but everyone feared the same thing, that she might slip away during the night, and no one would even hear her go. Even the sparrow has found a home, and the swallow a nest for herself, where she may have her young. Just down the hallway, already familiar with the scent of fear and the ache of abandonment, was a 4-month-old border collie pup named Benny. He'd arrived a week earlier from a derelict farm where he was left chained and forgotten. Thin and restless, Benny had the haunted eyes of a dog that had heard too much yelling and known too little love. He was wary, not aggressive, just unsure. He flinched at loud sounds. He barked when trapped. His world was made of loops, circling his kennel again and again, watching people with equal parts longing and mistrust. But then Rumi arrived. And the moment her bundled body was carried past his door, something inside Benny, something primal and ancient, shifted. He froze mid-step, muscles tight. Two volunteers moved carefully, slowly, as if they were carrying a feather and a prayer. Her body was wrapped in the same blanket, her head hanging low, dried blood painting her muzzle. They placed her inside a medical kennel directly across from Benny's, a faint click of the latch. The lights softened, silence fell. Benny didn't bark. Didn't move, his ears dropped back, his eyes widened. He backed into his corner, breath quickening. What was this fragile creature across from him? She didn't smell like a dog. Didn't move like one. She smelled like leaves and wilderness and something broken. And in that instant, Benny didn't feel cautious. He felt responsible. The righteous care for the needs of their animals. That first night, Rumi didn't move. Her chest rose and fell like a sigh that had lost its voice. Her eyes stayed open, but unseeing. She existed only in breath, not in presence. Benny, who usually curled up in his crate, paced for hours. Quietly, no barking, no whining, just watching. When the lights went out, he didn't sleep. Instead, he crept closer to the side of his kennel that faced hers and laid down, pressing his side against the metal bars. His ears perked each time a volunteer whispered her vitals. He didn't understand the words, dilated pupils, unstable respiration, but he knew the energy. The hush, the grief in their voices. He didn't know what this creature was, only that she was vanishing. And in the darkness, as snow began to fall lightly outside the center, Benny became her silent guardian. A friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. The morning was quiet, too quiet. Rumi hadn't moved at all. Her body was curled tightly, still facing the wall, one ear twitching now and then like a static signal from a fading world. The swelling in her face had receded slightly, but her eyes were still cloudy, distant. Benny didn't eat his breakfast. Instead, he inched toward the bars. His paws stiff, his nose twitching, no barking, no tail wag. Just presence, just watching. And then something shifted, subtle, like a breeze through dead leaves. Her eyes moved. Just barely, a flicker. Benny's head tilted left, then right. He leaned in closer, still silent, still. And though she didn't move again, though she didn't lift her head or even blink at him, that single shift was everything. Because it meant something deep inside her was still reaching. Still. Listening. Still fighting. And Benny, wild-hearted, once abandoned, once scared, made a vow without words that morning he would not let her face this alone. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Their eyes locked, no fanfare. Number. Flash of emotion, no sudden change in breath. Just one glance, slow, uncertain, ancient. Like two strangers in a story written long before either of them knew they existed. Rumi's face sagged just slightly after their gaze touched, as if some unspoken weight had finally slipped off her chest. A breath let out without sound. And, Benny, the skittish pup who didn't trust the world, didn't move, didn't bark, didn't tilt his head or wag his tail. He didn't understand her silence, but he chose to stay in it with her. And in the realm of broken animals, that meant more than love. It meant solidarity. It meant surrendering fear in service of something fragile. It meant everything. That stillness held for days, like the eye of a storm neither one was strong enough to name. Then came the fourth morning, early, too early. The hallway lights flicked on softly. Volunteers walked in, whispering around Rumi's enclosure like they were in a church. One carried a gray travel crate, the kind used when you don't know if an animal's ever coming back the same. Another held a clipboard, her stethoscope catching the light. The gate clicked open quietly. They called her name. She didn't resist. Her small frame remained slack, limbs limp as they slid her onto a padded board and then gently into the crate. Her head lolled sideways like a petal folding in sleep. They covered the crate with a soft towel, and across the aisle, Benny stood. And, the Lord is near to the broken-hearted and saves the crushed in spirit. The shift in him was instant. His nose pressed hard against the kennel door. A soft whine escaped, barely audible. His tail stayed low, ears pinned back, a posture of loss. As they passed him, he didn't bark. He paced once, then stopped. then whimpered, low and confused. The kind of sound that asked a question he didn't know how to phrase. She was gone. Rumi had been taken for emergency imaging. An MRI to see if the damage in her brain was irreversible, to measure the swelling, to determine if she'd ever walk again, see again, live again. The sedation went smoothly, but it would take hours. And while science measured damage in scans and shadows, Benny only measured absence. He sniffed the metal gate, the floor, the air, then moved quietly across his enclosure and curled up near the divider where her scent still lingered, the spot she always lay closest to. He didn't eat, didn't drink. A volunteer kneeled and whispered gently, "It's okay, Benny, she'll be back soon." But he didn't move, he just lay there, not sleeping, just waiting. He hadn't known her long, just a few days. But in that short eternity she had become his anchor, his stillness, his mirror. He missed her like a brother who had no words to explain why. Two are better than one. For if one falls, the other will lift them up. It was late afternoon when the hallway door creaked open again. Benny heard it before anyone else. His ears perked. His head snapped up. Two volunteers entered, moving slowly, one carrying the same gray travel crate, but this time without a towel. Rumi lay inside, exposed to the light. She looked changed, not healed. Not whole, but no longer vanishing. Her head tilted, her eyes open and glimmering with something close to clarity. Her breathing was steadier, her limbs still limp, but not lifeless. Benny stood immediately. He didn't bark or cry. He just watched, eyes locked, chest tight. The volunteers opened her kennel and gently repositioned her on a bed of fresh towels. Her legs shifted weakly, her ears flicked. Her eyes were clearer. Now, not sharp, not playful, but present. She didn't look at Benny, not right away. He waited, still and focused. Then, after a pause that felt like forever, he backed away, lay down slowly, right across from her gate, as close as the steel bars would let him. For a long time, she didn't move, just rested in the corner, but then something inside her turned. Her eyes, slowly, delicately, she looked at him. It was a breath, then two, no sound, no spark, just connection, unnamed and infinite. Be still and know that I am God. By week's end, the rhythm between them had deepened into something sacred. Every night, Benny curled up beside the gate that divided them. And every night, Rumi drifted toward the opposite side, slowly, as if her body remembered his presence before her mind could catch up. They never touched. But they were never far. A silent gravity held them. Rumi still couldn't walk straight. Her body remained tilted like the world inside her hadn't found its balance yet. But her eyes now followed Benny, not always, but often enough to notice when he stood, when he turned, when he watched her. Then came the morning. That changed everything. Benny, as if compelled by something ancient, picked up his favorite toy, a frayed yellow cloth with knotted corners, and carried it gently to the edge of his gate. He dropped it in front of the divider and backed away, eyes steady, tail. Still, Rumi didn't move, not right away. But later that day, when a volunteer came by, the toy had shifted. It was resting just inside her side of the gate, nestled between her small front paws. Not chewed, not torn, just there. A gift acknowledged, a gentle whisper can move mountains. The next day he did it again. This time she didn't turn away. She blinked faster, lifted her head more often. Her meals, once ignored, now left behind half-eaten. Her posture shifted ever so slightly, less curled, more alert. The trembling in her hind legs dulled to occasional spasms. Her medical chart began to reflect what Benny already knew. Alertness increased, tracking improved, appetite returning. But no chart could measure what happened in that quiet space between them. No scan could explain why she only stirred when he was near. Sometimes healing doesn't come from medicine. Sometimes it comes from presence. From silent witnesses who stay when the world has given up. Two animals, different species, different wounds, becoming each other's safety. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. The day Lucy and Jake walked into the rescue center, they weren't looking for a miracle, just a dog, a companion. They'd recently moved near the forest edge, a quiet place, a good yard, space to breathe. A friend had mentioned a gentle border collie, a bit shy but special. His name was Benny. When they arrived, a staff member guided them through the main corridor. The first thing they noticed wasn't Benny, it was how still he was. He lay at the edge of his kennel, eyes fixed on something they couldn't yet see. As they approached, they saw her. On the other side of the barrier, a wild kitten, spotted and still. A bobcat. Thin, fragile, curled around a yellow toy like it was her own heartbeat. Her head still tilted, but her eyes. Those eyes were alive. A faithful friend is a strong defense. Jake blinked. "Is that a cat?" "No," the volunteer said. "Hey!" "Bobcat." Lucy crouched near Benny's gate. He looked at her, just briefly, and then turned his gaze back to Rumi. The volunteer explained how Benny used to tremble at every noise, how Rumi used to stare blankly at the wall, how something impossible bloomed between them. No touch, no contact, just companionship, healing. "They've never been apart since she came in," the staff said quietly. Lucy looked at Jake. "If we adopt him, how will he handle being away from her?" Jake didn't answer. They weren't just choosing a dog. They were choosing to sever a thread neither of them could see, but both could feel. What God has joined together, let no one separate. The morning they returned to adopt Benny, the air felt thick. Jake held a soft leash. Lucy carried a blanket. That smelled like their new home. Benny didn't know, not yet. But he would, and what happened next would change everything. He was rescued. But part of him stayed behind. With the wild heart that wouldn't let go, Benny had never asked for a second chance. But it had been handed to him anyway, wrapped in soft blankets, kind hands, and quiet hopes. He had survived the streets. He had survived the center. But when the volunteers opened that gate and called his name gently, something in him hesitated. Not because he didn't want the warmth, the toys, the family, but because part of him, the part that had grown close to a fragile, broken creature, behind a wire divider, wasn't ready to move on. The bobcat kitten, Rumi, hadn't been there at the edge this time. No nose-to-nose pause. No paw raised in acknowledgement. Just silence and her small frame turned away, deeper in the shadows of her kennel. Benny looked back once before stepping out, his body low, eyes searching for what wasn't there. "Even the sparrow finds a home," the verse whispered in the wind, "and the swallow builds her nest near your altar." That day the world gave Benny a home, but his soul? It was still watching the wire. Still waiting for her dot in the parking lot. Jake opened the SUV's back door. Benny jumped in, but he didn't settle. He turned, pressing his nose hard against the window, staring back at the building. As the engine started and gravel crunched beneath them, he kept his eyes locked on the trees that swallowed the center. Even when it was gone, he stayed still. Facing backward, Lucy tried to soothe him. She whispered promises, spread out soft blankets, laid toys on the floor of their warm home. She poured food into shiny bowls and patted the rug beside her. But Benny didn't budge. He paced briefly, sniffing corners, whimpered once like something sacred had been severed, and then he curled up on the cold floor, ignoring the softness meant for him. The bed they'd lovingly picked out remained untouched. He didn't eat, not that night, not the next. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. But sometimes love waits in silence and grief. Is the echo that follows you home. Back at the center, Rumi was just as still. She didn't stir at the sounds of footsteps, didn't blink when the volunteers passed her enclosure. Her breathing had changed, slower, heavier. Her food remained untouched. The little fabric toy she used to drag around now lay beside her, limp and abandoned. Volunteers moved around her more gently than usual. No one spoke aloud, but the ache hung like fog over the enclosures. Something was missing, not something, someone. The quiet between the walls had shifted. For the first time in weeks, both sides of the divider were empty. The righteous care for the needs of their animals, it is written. And those who cared for Rumi saw the hollow where Benny's presence had once anchored her. On the third day, Lucy picked up the phone with trembling fingers. "He won't eat," she said softly. "He just stares at the door." Her voice cracked under the weight of helplessness. On the other end, the volunteer paused, then spoke gently. "He's grieving," she said. "He formed a bond, a deep one, with one of our intakes, a Bobcat kitten. They weren't housed together, but something grew between them, quiet, powerful." Lucy didn't respond right away. "He hasn't even touched the blanket," she finally whispered. "He's just not here." That night, she and Jake sat in silence on the couch, watching their new dog sleep uneasily on the cold floor, his legs twitching with dreams he couldn't voice. "I thought animals forgot quickly," she said. Jake shook his head, voice low. "He doesn't need to forget, he needs to heal." Healing, a word that demands time. And sometimes a return. The next morning, they drove back to the center. Rumi hadn't moved. Her body was curled the same way, eyes dull, breathing shallow. But when Benny entered the corridor, slow steps, ears perked, tail lowered, something shifted. Subtle, but unmistakable. Rumi's head turned. Her eyes followed. His every move, it wasn't dramatic. It wasn't loud. But it was the first time in days that her body acknowledged life beyond her pain. Benny reached the divider, paused, and then laid down, silent and still, watching. Lucy turned to the nearest volunteer, her voice gentle but determined. "Can we come back? Just to see her? Until she's ready to leave?" There were no rules for this. No policies for heartbreak or wild love. But understanding needs no legislation. "Yes," they said. "As long as it helps her and him, you're welcome any time." "Blessed are the merciful," the verse rang softly, "for they shall be shown mercy." Mercy in this story came with fur and wire between them. What followed was slow. Like the turning of seasons, Benny didn't become a different dog overnight. But something in him changed. Instead of sulking near the door, he wandered the yard a little more each morning. He began sitting closer to Lucy's feet during coffee. When Jake walked through the front door in the evenings, Benny's tail began to wag, a small, hesitant joy, but joy nonetheless. He sniffed at his rope toy. Then, one day he picked it up. Then he curled up on the blanket. Then he ate. It was never all at once, but each moment was a step out of the fog. He still stared out the window sometimes, long and hard, but not with the same ache. Not with the same loss, and every Sunday, they returned. Every time Benny stepped through the center's gate, something inside him came alive. He pulled toward the corridor, steps quicker, eyes sharper. Rumi was always there, still wild, still behind the mesh. But different, alert, her head lifted when she heard his steps. Her eyes locked on his, she no longer trembled. Her limbs moved with confidence. And every time she walked to the divider and waited, Benny would sit, then lay down. Rumi would press her forehead to the wire. He did the same. No words, no howls. Just breath, connection. "Deep calls to deep in the roar of your waterfalls," said the psalmist. That wire mesh held more than two creatures. It held a miracle of quiet healing between what was wild and what had been broken. 2 months later, the veterinary team made the announcement Rumi had made a full neurological recovery. She was strong. She hunted confidently in the monitored wilderness zone. She was ready for the wild again. A soft, handwritten sign appeared on her enclosure. "Approved for release," some of the staff cried. Others smiled through their tears. And Lucy? She simply reached for Benny's leash and held it tighter as he sat beside her, gazing at Rumi with the same stillness, the same peace. She would return to the forest. Benny would stay. But this time, neither of them looked away. There is a time for everything, Ecclesiastes tells us. A time to keep and a time to let go. On the morning of her release, the center was silent. Volunteers moved with reverence. The crate was padded with fresh blankets. The path led to a protected forest outside Ashland. Rumi didn't resist. She stepped in on her own. Her coat gleamed, her body lean and strong. At the edge of the crate, she paused and looked down the corridor, her final glance at the life that helped her live. Then he was waiting, still, focused, calm. He didn't bark, he didn't cry. He just watched her, as he always had, understanding, not resisting. Lucy placed her hand on his back and whispered, "You did good." The crate door shut softly. A volunteer lifted it. No grand farewells. Just the sacred act of letting go, because healing isn't always forever. And love doesn't always mean holding on. Sometimes it's enough to be the bridge that carries another toward freedom. At Hope and Fur, every story reminds us why we fight for these lives. From emotional animal rescues to incredible wildlife recoveries, these journeys prove that animal miracles, human and animal connection, and touching animal stories can change the world. When you watch, share, and support, you bring hope to creatures like Benny and Rumi. Help us keep telling these stories, because every life saved is a story worth shouting from the wild.